Are we ready to ditch our gas boilers? Is artificial intelligence a risk to humanity? And are landlords being unfairly vilified? This is Politics Live. Joining me, Conservative MP Bim Afalami, Liberal Democrat MP Sarah Olney, the author and journalist Paul Mason, who's been trying to become a Labour candidate for Parliament, and former Conservative Special Advisor Anita Boateng. Today, Grant Shapps promises to power up Britain and get us to net zero.
This is a massive investment today. It will make a big difference to the way we power Britain.
But can we be convinced to switch off the gas for good?
You have been asked to be part of a pioneering proposal to switch from natural gas supply to hydrogen.
Have you been asked?
No. We
have not been asked.
Also on the programme.
It's pretty impressive, but the trouble is it does good things for us, but it can make horrible mistakes.
Dire warnings from the world's leading experts as artificial intelligence develops at lightning speed. Will the government's light touch regulation be enough?
Some, a tiny minority, of unscrupulous landlords are using the threat of eviction in order to jack up rents.
Unscrupulous landlord, says Michael Gove, but are they? This landlord said she's being unfairly vilified. Let's start with the government's announcement today and unveiling of its energy security and net zero policy. Reams of paper has reached our inboxes today. The sort of central theme, or certainly part of it, in terms of its focus on clean energy, is that it can't happen without dramatic and drastic change to the way we heat our homes. My opening question to the panel is, are you prepared, Bim, to ditch your gas boiler anytime soon?
Well, my village isn't on gas, so I would be prepared, but that's a whole other issue. I mean, look, I think that it's important that we make this transition. There'll be arguments about how quickly we can make it, and there'll be some people that say, look, we need to do more faster, and that's a legitimate concern. But principally, the most important thing that's come out today is not actually the big headlines. It's the fact that we are going to adjust the cost to people of gas compared to electricity, and trying to reduce electricity prices so that when people do get, for example, heat pumps in their homes, which, by the way, most homes are capable of doing.
They are expensive, though, aren't they? Still, even with government subsidy.
With the grant, but that price will come down. But running the heat pump is often what people tell me they worry about. And so reducing the cost of electricity, and yes, proportionally increasing the cost of gas, will help encourage that transition further. So I think that will make a big difference.
Are you prepared to ditch your gas boiler, Sarah, anytime soon?
Yes, absolutely. Actually considering it. We are thinking of some home improvements where our gas boiler is sited, and I'm thinking ahead, and I'm like, we are going to have to get probably a heat pump to replace that gas boiler. So absolutely, I'm preparing. But I think one of the things that Bim has really missed there is what our priority needs to be is actually reducing the amount of fuel that we're all using in the first place. And the opportunity that has been missed time and time again by this government is to really increase the energy efficiency of our homes. And actually, it's pointless having a heat pump unless you have a heat-efficient home. So as far as, you know, what the Liberal Democrats are saying is that what we need is to be much greater focus on that energy efficiency, really upgrading our homes, insulation, and that will...
With lots of investment then from a government to do so?
We will need that investment from government, but also we can create a much better environment and an economy for energy efficient measures. But it's a no-brainer because firstly it will reduce people's fuel bills, which is so important at this time of increased prices, but also it will get us much further, much faster towards our net zero goals.
It all sounds eminently sensible and relatively straightforward through a process of transition. But we showed in the headlines the couple there sitting in their home. We can show you the story in The Guardian. Cheshire villagers will not be forced to join hydrogen energy trial, which is what they were responding to. There had been plans for British Gas and Cadent to turn off the supply of natural gas to almost actually 2,000 homes in Whitby near Ellesmere Port as part of a plan to create the UK's first hydrogen-fuelled village. But there's a backlash. People weren't asked, they say, but there is still a backlash. Even if they were asked, they won't be forced to join the pilot. It's not going to be easy, is it?
Well, I'm not going to play the game of what would you do as an individual.
Why not?
The real issue is what is the government doing to set a net zero target, prove that it is capable of reaching it, and then come up with a plan. Well, yes, it's set one. But when we see the graph later today, we will, I predict, see a huge gap between aspiration and reality, which is filled by a hit and hope plan on carbon capture and storage, which is, and I'm a supporter of carbon capture and storage.
Yeah, but how do you bring people with you?
You bring people with you by showing that the regulation will deliver them cheaper and more secure energy, and this today, I'm sorry, it doesn't. Whether I choose, how am I going to afford it?
Well, but you're an example of someone who could be brought along or convinced of doing it.
I don't need any convincing. I'm one of the UK champions for banning fossil fuels. But what I need convincing of is that the government has a plan based on science. And I believe we will be at the end of today, by the 10 o'clock news, we'll be at the point where we can show a graph where where there's a huge gap between what the government says it's going to do and how it's going to do it.
That is the issue, isn't it? The target's there, net zero by 2050. It feels like a very long time away, and yet we've got to do all these really quite dramatic things.
Yeah. And I think this is a real important step forward. We've absolutely seen announcements around energy efficiency, as well as the announcement, as Bim highlights, particularly around this question of electricity prices, because we all know gas is more volatile. Electricity prices in the UK aren't extraordinarily high, but they're a little higher than they are in some parts of Europe. And what you want to do is get to a source where you've got clean energy going into the electricity system, and then you have more heat pump take-up. So I think the government is doing all the right things, and it understands fundamentally that there isn't a silver bullet with this, that you need to tackle every single element of what is required to allow us to get to net zero by 2050. And I think it is really encouraging that we see, actually across all the political parties, the seriousness with which this is taken and the detailed work that we're seeing from the government about how you make this a reality.
Paul?
The biggest solar farm in Britain is in North Wales. We need 67 solar farms per year between now and 2035 to be connected to the grid in order to meet the government's net zero target. Nothing I'm seeing today shows how they're going to get to build them or connect them to the grid. And until we see that, we're just talking about a fantasy plan and not a real one. And it puts all the onus on the individuals. You must change. I want the government to take seriously quadrupling offshore wind, tripling solar, doubling onshore wind, which, you know, your own constituents are against, although you are for it. So until we see the government commit to that, the answer is going to be the Labour Party and its plan. Is it a fantasy plan?
Unsurprisingly, I disagree. Let me take on, look, Paul's a serious guy. Let me take on very seriously what he said. In relation to the grid, the issue, when I've spoken to the very senior people at the National Grid, the issue is not people coming forward with proposals, whether it be wind, solar and the like. It is the grid capacity and how we upgrade the grid. When I've asked them, how is it that we upgrade it? To what extent? Because they're a private business. Or rather a public business, they're in the private sector.
It was publicly owned. We once controlled it.
But I've said, how do we upgrade the grid? The biggest, and there are lots of things that go into it, but the biggest thing they say are regulatory changes.
Yes.
And that they are precisely the things we are working on right now. So if we get those right, and it's complicated and difficult, but if we get those regulatory changes correct, then we can hugely expand the amount of all the investment, all the people who want to put in solar, wind, etc., onto the grid. That isn't actually about what you were saying in terms of, you know, walls and billions of government spending. It is about a lot of it about expanding the grid are regulatory changes that allow the National Grid to make those changes.
Well, let me bring Sarah in.
But just the reason why I focus on this is that it's very important when we talk about this issue. It is not a dividing line between Labour or some people on the left who say what we need is just billions more of government spending and that's the only way we can do it. There is a need for greater investment, both from private sector and the public sector, but often the changes are regulatory, they're technical, and that's the detailed, nuanced work that we're doing right now.
So the announcement today has come about because the government were dragged to court by Friends of the Earth because they were not fulfilling their obligations under the Climate Change Act 2008, which was passed 15 years ago, 13 of which the Tories have been in power. Why is it only now that they're talking about regulatory changes to the national grid? We've had so much time to deliver the changes that we need, that we've known for years we're going to need, and now you're talking about changes to the national grid. If that's been the obstacle all this time, why haven't you done it before?
It hasn't been the obstacle all this time. we spent a lot of time building the pipeline of investment, the pipeline of projects, and
We
now
could have
what
been
we
doing
need
the
to do
regulatory
is
changes in the meantime.
I think it's very
Government's
telling that
difficult.
the big criticism is why didn't we do this sooner, right?
Government is difficult. Of course, there are things that you maybe could have done a couple of years earlier, but then there was a big pandemic which put in play that put to play a lot of the plans that we had in this area. What I'm saying is, it is not always the answer that, oh no, we just needed to spend more government money.
Right.
A lot of the changes
That's not what
we
I'm
need,
challenging,
a lot of the
though.
changes that we need to
I'm
make,
saying that
we're
the
making
government
them.
have not had a plan in all of this time, and it's only as a result of being dragged to court by Friends of the Earth
all right.
that they finally come up with
let
one,
me-
and even now it's not.
Anita, and then I'll come to you, Paul.
I think that the government actually came forward with quite a landmark plan that was actually quite unique in Europe in terms of bringing together all the different aspects of net zero that you would need to make 2050 a reality. So I think what we've seen is steady progress. And the fact that there is now a department that's solely focused on energy security and net zero makes a tremendous difference. And from the conversations I've seen Grant have with serious industry individuals about the detailed work that you're required, the boring logistical changes that are required around planning and around capacity that are going to make this a reality, I think we have to give the government a great deal of credit for the progress that we've seen that is not happening across Europe.
I do agree with your point about the Department for Net Zero, but again, I think it's long overdue and it could have happened
So would
many years ago.
would the Lib Dems commit billions of pounds of investment to whole new green energy and infrastructure?
Yeah, we had that in our 2019 manifesto. We had lots of money that we were wanting to invest in a new green economy,
And you
it
build
would have
it
created
right
new
across
jobs,
the
skilled
country?
jobs, right across the country.
All your
yes.
constituencies. Well, there
Well,
aren't
I
that
mean, the
many of them,
point is
actually.
there are opportunities for green energy in many parts of the country that are that the government are committed to levelling up our coastal communities. There's so many opportunities for offshore and onshore wind, for solar panels, for tidal. This could have been a real opportunity which we have yet to take advantage of.
Just briefly, at the end of this discussion, Paul, the commitment to ending oil and gas exploration. Do you accept that we are going to be in that transition with gas for quite a long time?
Gas, according to experts, might play something like a 10% role because you need it because of the immaturity of the renewables sector. But what we need to do is put a moratorium on new fossil fuel exploration, new fossil fuel projects. But to come back to it, money is important. I don't say money is the be-all and end of it. We have to deregulate or re-regulate. But in the end, if you want green British steel produced in Port Talbot and Scunthorpe, you're going to have to spend billions in government subsidy because America is doing so, the European Union is doing so. We will lose the battle for green steel, which means that our offshore wind turbines will be built by foreign steel. Do you like that? Unless we put money into that industry.
End of any new licences for oil and gas?
Not at all. We need energy security. That's really going to matter. And actually, a lot of the conversation, for instance, about hydrogen, that's important, but that's quite a way in the future. We have to deal with the challenges as we're faced today. And the government has got the balance right, in my view.
Let's talk about artificial intelligence. The tech entrepreneur Elon Musk has weighed in on this issue today. He has joined calls and a signatory to a letter for a 6-month pause in creation of giant AI digital minds. He's one of 1,000 artificial intelligence experts urging delay until the world can be confident the effects will be positive and risks manageable. Let's just have a look at some of the parts of the letter. Advanced AI could represent a profound change in the history of life on Earth. It goes on to say, should we let machines flood our information channels with propaganda and untruth? Should we automate away all the jobs, including the fulfilling ones? And this final bit, should we develop non-human minds that might eventually outnumber, outsmart, obsolete and replace us? Should we risk loss of control of our civilization? Is that hyperbole, Anita, or do you agree?
I think it's hyperbole. And I think that actually the way that the US is regulating AI is quite different to the UK. So it's going for a very self-regulatory regime, which I think maybe has caused some of these concerns that we hear about in the letter. Look, of course there are risks around artificial intelligence, but I think the instinct of the government, which is to focus on what might be used rather than the broader principle, is probably the best way of understanding the sector and ensuring that we can regulate as we learn, because there is no way to get this perfectly right. And what we've got to do is make sure that we've got a regulatory regime that is really close to the industry, that has the expertise that we really need to understand what's happening and to ensure that things can develop in a safe way.
Right, but it sounds quite scary, though. I mean, when you read that letter and the contents of it from people who either are vested interests, of course they are, or they're the ones who should know.
I think I'd agree with what Anita was saying about regulation, but it's not just about the AI industry. It's about the impact it has on everybody. And we've been having I led a debate in Parliament recently about copyright exemptions for creative work. And that was just all going to be lifted, and literally anything that you've created as art or music or anything could just be used copyright-free by the AI industry. And that was just as a result of the government just nodding that through without really thinking about it. So I think actually what the letter really highlights is it's not just about the tech industry. It's not just about social media or perhaps the technical application that we might be able to use AI for. It's about what does that impact have on everybody else. And I think we've had several decades now of social media to show that these things, they might start with the tech sector, but they have very wide-ranging impacts, and that's something that we need to stay ahead of.
And what do you use it for? Do you use chatbots? ChatGPT?
It's not about that. It's not about that. AI uses me. AI learns from my behaviour where I go online, when I go through a supermarket physically, when I go through an airport physically. There is AI learning about me. The question is, OK, and I put it to the rest of the panel. Network Rail has highly automated systems that run the railways, OK? That's automation. Human beings sit on the loop and they manage it. If they came to us and said, you know what, we've got actually, the IT department's come up with something quite remarkable. 100% of the time it runs on the modelling, it runs the network completely safely, but because it's an AI, we can't document how it works, how it takes decisions. Shall we just switch it on now and sack all the controllers? What would we say? We'd say, let's take some time, guys. And what Musk and co, and I agree with them here. What they're saying is society would never take a decision like that. Of course, Network Rail would never take a decision like that. But we of society are sitting back going, OK, get on with it. And unfortunately, we're not taking this in a vacuum. The People's Republic of China is quite happy with all these detrimental effects. They're quite happy to see human control by machines. And whatever we do to regulate AI, we will be up against a competitor society that is prepared to unleash the negative benefits.
Bim?
I mean, look, humility is not always that common in politicians, but I think we do have to be humble about our ability in this country to somehow control how AI is developed, whether it be around the world. And I think that I take what Elon Musk and Steve Wozniak, co-founder of Apple, these are serious guys who do know a lot more than any of us do about how these systems work. So I do take what they say seriously. I think the key thing is we need much more international cooperation between Britain, EU, US, China, whether it be the UN or other fora, to really internationally agree and understand some principles on which we're going to allow artificial intelligence to develop. The reason why I talk about humility is we shouldn't pretend that we're gonna be really good at regulating AI, because of course it only takes 6 months or something to get through Parliament and all the rest of it. In the meantime, so much has changed. So we have to work out internationally what are the broad principles that everybody agrees to abide by, and through that I think we can make sure that AI goes forward in a way that society and different countries broadly agree with.
Well, I mean, this is Michelle Donnellan. Let's just show you what she has said. She is the Science and Technology Secretary. We will not put these principles, this is principles about regulating AI, on a statutory footing initially. New rigid and onerous legislative requirements on businesses could hold back AI innovation. Is this an attempt then by the government wanting to be at the forefront, sacrificing perhaps some of our sort of freedoms or the limits of AI for economic prosperity, as she would see it?
Well, no, because of what I was saying. You've got to, when something is moving this quickly, the smart thing to do is be humble, watch it, and see as it develops. And, as I say, build your international cooperation. I think she's just taking a very realistic position.
And the EU, came up with legislation like last year that's already out of date. So I think that there is something to be said for going for the regulatory approach, getting the expertise into the right regulators and watching as you go. The sandbox idea, which is where people kind of work really closely together with regulators as they develop these different industries and technologies, is a really important way of doing it. The other thing to say is that a lot of businesses, clients that I work with in my daily life have been using AI for a very long time. The game changer has been around the generation of data that allows this to be a possibility. And I think in some sectors it will be hugely beneficial, particularly like modernising sectors, but others like the creative industry that Sarah just highlighted. You know, copyright is fundamental to music and to art, and ensuring that it is used as a tool and not as a replacement for human creativity, to your point, Paul, is absolutely critical to ensuring that we benefit from this new tool.
Can we do our jobs better than a chatbot?
It depends what the job is. But
Well, ours.
Coming back on Michelle Donnelly's quote there, you know, the Manchester Liberals in the 19th century said onerous regulation on child labour could get in the way of the factory system. In the end, stopping child labour caused the takeoff of a mature, i.e., if you regulate a new industry, you can force it towards the best outcome. But you know, let us be clear that all we have are states. Against large corporations deploying AI and machine learning, all we have are the state. There's no other institution in society. So when we say, oh, let's not regulate, there are only states, companies and individuals.
We said no, legislation can take a very long time. The online safety bill is a great example of that. And actually, regulation can be a bit more agile.
I mean, we've had, as you know, the Industrial Revolution, the advent of the printing press, broadcasting. I mean, is there anything really to worry about? Isn't this just the next stage, or is it on a different level?
Well, I think with AI, I think there's probably lots and lots of applications we haven't even thought of yet that could really enhance productivity, which is something that we need to take very seriously as a country. But I think just back to Paul's initial point, if you're going to adopt an AI solution into your business or your organisation, can you be confident in the output? Is it a predictable output? Because otherwise, it's going to be really, really hard for you to be kind of like, yes, I can see.
Is it an ethical output?
Well, ethical as well, but it is that. But that's part of being predictable. You know, if you can't predict it, you can't say whether it's going to be ethical or not.
It's important that we shouldn't lose sight of where AI can make a really positive difference to human lives. And let me give you an example. A friend of mine in America is co-founder of an AI business that helps detect strokes. People who are about to have strokes or almost going to be in that position within maybe days or weeks. It can help detect it using medical professionals, and with the AI together, they can get much better outcomes on head injuries. Right? I use that. Now, that is a very good example of artificial intelligence being used as a tool to help medical scientists help individuals. That's the sort of thing we should be promoting and helping.
And why did the NHS initial attempt to try and use DeepMind, Google's DeepMind AI, to produce beneficial outcomes, which we all want, on, I think it was kidney disease. Why did that fail? Because they realised really early there was no ethical way in which they could use the data of NHS patients without breaking a fundamental pact with them. So this is where ethics intrudes. This is what we have to get across to the Silicon Valley people. Ethics will always intrude into what you think, the benign outcomes you're after, unless you build them into the very beginning of the project.
I think that's completely right, and I think Sarah's right too. So the answer is that's why AI isn't going to replace humans. Like, we're always going to need to bring our human values to these decisions, because this is a machine that is using data. We have to have, for instance, AI in terms of its power around health and diagnostics is really where it has the potential to be very revolutionary. But the role of doctors in that is going to be more important. But you're completely right that we need to build our understanding of the limits of AI and where humans have to play a role in inputting data as well as assessing outcomes. And that is where I think the regulation should move.
I mean, just one final thing. Do you think the people who are regulating, legislating, or who will be actually know enough about AI?
I don't think anybody knows enough about it. No.
Sometimes
no human knows enough about it.
And I think it's an unobservable technology. That's one of the reasons why I keep coming back to this point. Politicians say, oh, we'll regulate it. Doesn't get you there when something's moving this quickly.
Fast, yeah.
That's why the regulatory principles of how something should develop are really all that you can do, working with other countries and other governments to see what's happening in their countries, so that then, overall, as a world, we can make sure it develops in a sensible direction.
Final word of caution, I guess, and opportunity is that businesses who are in this area cannot afford to sit there in their own rooms and figure out this technology. They have to bring government with them. They have to educate and help them understand it, because otherwise, down the line, you can end up in a situation where things get ruled out and you end up in an AI cold winter, effectively, because everyone gets spooked. And that is really because we're all learning, including people that are using AI, about how it works.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Let me show you this headline in the Daily Telegraph. You'll remember hearing Michael Gove, the Levelling Up Secretary, in the headlines. This says Michael Gove faces backlash for fear-mongering landlord comments. He was describing a tiny minority, he said, as unscrupulous. Let's talk to Carolyn Uphill. She's been a landlord in Manchester for 20 years. Welcome to you. Do you feel like you are being vilified, Carolyn? Are you an unscrupulous landlord?
Well, I'm certainly not an unscrupulous landlord, but yes, I do feel vilified. Pretty well all the coverage in all the media is negative about landlords. And yet, as Michael Gove said, most of that is talking about a very small minority. And the vast majority of landlords, and I know many, many landlords, are responsible people who look after their property and look after their tenants. You've been doing it for 20 years. How's it changed? Well, there's certainly a lot more demand, yeah, that's good for a landlord, but not very good at all for tenants and people who are looking for property. But the most important changes has been the regulation. We now have over 160 separate pieces of legislation and regulation which landlords have to abide by. It's confusing, it's overblown, and it just keeps on growing, and yet it doesn't solve the criminal minority. There are powers to deal with the criminal minority. Most responsible landlords do wish that councils would use them. When you talk about the language and feeling vilified, why do you think people say those things? Won't it be from direct personal experience? But not the direct personal experience of the majority. There are undoubtedly some problem landlords, some criminal element, which I, as a responsible landlord, would love to see driven out. But that's not reflecting the majority. All right, let's bring in our other panellists. Paul, does that sound pretty fair? Sometimes on the left, landlords are painted as villains, aren't they? Well, I wouldn't say villains, but we have moved from a system where the aspiration was for home ownership for young people to a situation where college leavers, with carrying 27 to 40k worth of debt with them and looking at house prices, even in quite suburban and rural areas, can't buy them, are forced to rent, and therefore it is a landlord's market. And regulation is not good enough. There might be hundreds of pieces of regulation. I want to see more. And I want to see the number one thing is to give tenants security so that landlords can't artificially or arbitrarily, I should say, well, you're out by the end of the year and that your rent's just gone up by X amount that you couldn't predict. And then you've got all the other stuff. I have a dog, I have a pet, which I dote on. And so many people say there are restrictions on what they can even do in the places they live in. Even before we're talking about the extreme problems of, in some extreme cases, of mismanagement, mould, poor maintenance. Carolyn, do you recognise all of that? Certainly not from my perspective, no. You have to remember, I'm in business. I invested in these properties, in my case, to provide a pension income. And it's in my interest to look after my asset, which is the property, and my customers, which are the tenant. I want reliable, long-term paying tenants who look after the property. The properties I have which are suitable for families, I have families in them, I have pets in them, but it's all within reason. I also have student accommodation where that wouldn't be appropriate. And people like students, for instance, need to rent for a period in their lives. And the danger is that if we restrict landlords' business too much, they will leave the market. Many of my colleagues are talking about it's getting too much, it's getting too risky. If they sell up and there is less and less accommodation, then tenants have less choice, are less able to be discerning and avoid the rogue landlords. And rents, of course, are pushed upwards. And rents have gone up not just because landlords feel like putting rents up, but because our costs have gone up, the mortgage costs have gone up, all the maintenance costs have gone up. And where I provide accommodation to students, they want bills inclusive. You can imagine what's happened to the energy bills. Bim, is the government going to war with landlords on the back of the sorts of things that Paul has been saying, despite Carolyn obviously saying that she is a very responsible landlord, hiking up rents, no-fault evictions, and the state of some properties?
No, clearly government's not going to war with landlords, and obviously Carolyn's right to say that the vast, vast majority behave very, very well. I think that the fundamental issue here, to be honest, is the difficulty that so many people have of getting on the housing ladder. That's the real fundamental problem. We've moved from a world where the average age of the first-time buyer was the mid-20s. Now it's in the mid-30s. That has huge societal effects.
And is that because Conservative governments haven't built enough homes? There just isn't the supply.
No, it's not actually because of that. It's because of the fact that we've had a huge growth in asset prices due to quantitative easing since the financial crisis. It's because of the fact that we have built more homes, but our population has outstripped that even more, even the fact we're building more. And yes, I think we need big changes to give opportunities for the next generation.
People will say, Bim, who's been in charge since 2010? In fact, with the Liberal Democrats in the first few years to do this.
On that precise point, if you look at Canada, Australia, United States, these are three countries that all have, frankly, a lot more space than we do, and they have had even higher rises in the cost of new homes, of homes to buy. So it's not just a problem that we find in this country, it's a societal issue across the Western world. We need to deal with it, because if it continues in this way, we're going to have more problems with people renting, we're going to have more difficulties with landlords, because it's such a landlord's market, as Paul was saying, that this is going to end up happening with a small number of unscrupulous people. We need to much more radically tackle the question of younger people not being able to get on the housing ladder. That is a fundamental challenge, I think, for this time.
Sarah, you're raising your eyebrows.
Only just again, you know, the Conservatives have been in power for a long time.
But what would the Liberal Democrats do?
What I was going to say was what we've been waiting for, one of the things we've been waiting for this government to do is the Renters' Rights Act, which has been promised and promised and promised, and we still don't have it. And for the Liberal Democrats, the most important point about that is that it would abolish unfair evictions, what they call Section 21 evictions. And I think it's really, really important. And it was good to hear from Carolyn, because I think we obviously really want to hear from the landlords who are giving a good service and good for their tenants. But there's no doubt there are tenants out there who are facing unfair eviction, families as well with young children, which, you know, creates huge problems for them, and not least for the children at school and for, you know, their prospects for the future. So we really want to see that legislation brought forward, and I don't understand why it's been delayed. But the important thing about that is about getting the right balance between the rights of landlords and the rights of tenants.
Right. Carolyn, listening to that, what about Section 21, the no-fault evictions? Do you agree it should be taken away, banned?
I think it's a very risky experiment because, of course, the advent of Section 21 led to many investors having the confidence to invest in buy-to-let property. People like myself, and I'm not talking about people who bought things first-time buyers would buy, all of my 6 properties were empty and in need of major refurbishment to the point of having to rip floors out because they were rotten, they were uninhabitable, and I've turned those into usable homes. And one thing that gave me confidence was that if there was a problem, I knew there was a simple mechanism to change tenants if that ever became necessary. Now, in 20 years, I have never, ever actioned a Section 21 because I've had good, reliable tenants.
All right.
But it's completely untrue to say that Section 21 is always a no-fault eviction. It's a no-explanation eviction. There is always a reason, and very often it's because there's problems with the tenancy, either erratic payments or quite often upsetting the neighbours, antisocial behaviour, but the neighbours do not want to testify and come forward and cause themselves problems. They want that tenant moved on, and that's very often why Section 21 is used. Take it away.
Take it away.
It will be interesting to see what happens.
Well, are you convinced by the argument set up by Carolyn?
Well, I'm convinced that there needs to be a balance between, as Carolyn says, I think the thing that really struck me in your answer there, Carolyn, was particularly your point around enforcement and ensuring that actually, as you say, if the regulations aren't tackling the kind of small minority who are, you know, not taking action, that councils are empowered and are putting investment in their ability to enforce when there are landlords that aren't doing the right thing. And it feels like the question of enforcement is probably going to matter more than the regulation, although I think having this as an option should be something to ensure that there is more confidence on the renter side. it's always got to be a balance, because we've also seen a lot of landlords selling their properties, and that is also a problem because a lot of people need to rent, even if it's just temporarily as they look to save up for a home.
Carolyn Uphill, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to talk about the government's illegal migration bill. It's currently going through committee stage in Parliament. There have been amendments suggested by two groups of Conservative MPs. I think they've actually now been withdrawn, but one for having more safe and legal routes for refugees and migrants, and the other for closing down legal loopholes. The government have given them assurances, apparently. Well, we're going to discuss another amendment, and this is from a Labour MP, Stella Creasy. She's written in Labour List, let's show you. The illegal migration bill fails to tackle criminality and is a waste of MPs' time. She wants to have the word illegal taken out. She says it's formalising toxic rhetoric. You support this amendment. Why?
Well, let me just say, I'm just a journalist. I don't speak on behalf of Labour.
But you support the principle of it.
Absolutely, because what we're seeing is an attempt to stigmatise a human right. It is a human right to seek asylum for people under the Universal Declaration, under the Refugee Convention. There are no illegal immigrants in this sense.
Except the UK, of course, has passed its own legislation. The government has said that it has made it illegal to arrive on these shores, rightly or wrongly, by boat across the channel.
And we will see whether or not that survives the European Court of Human Rights. Right. But imagine saying the illegal speeding bill or the illegal robbery bill. What you're doing is you're basically criminalising an activity that is not criminal under international law. And I think it's part of, and I would say to you, Bim, I would say any Conservative needs to be ashamed of the way that this government is trying to make us basically a pariah state in international law at the same time as otherising and stigmatising people who, for no fault of their own, have rocked up on our shores in search of help. And there's not that many of them, actually. I think let's take the toxic language out of the legislation.
Do you agree with that? Do you agree that the language itself is demonising or dehumanising? I
don't, but let me explain why. So there are two principal issues here. You have the issue of the language and the word illegal and whether that's somehow toxic or whatever. I don't agree with that. The reason why it is reasonable to have it on the face of the bill, first of all, it's communicative. We've got to explain to people why we're doing what we're doing, and it is illegal, and we want to make sure that it is clear that it is illegal for people who come here not through the agreed rules of immigration that we have. Often they are coming from, for example, a war-torn place. They can be coming from Afghanistan or somewhere where they're under persecution. Completely understand that they want to get out of that country.
What is the legal way they can get here?
But those countries are very far away, and they come through a lot of safe places before coming to this country. And that, I'm afraid, we cannot be the magnet for the entire world if people want to come here, even if they're coming here, obviously, for a very, very genuine reason, they have to go to the nearest safe country. Of course, there are people who are legitimately coming here and claiming asylum, and those are treated in the appropriate way. Yes, we need to get the backlog down, the administration needs to be improved, but it is not toxic to say that there needs to be proportion and fairness to the people that are already in this country when people are coming here often through safe countries from which they are fleeing persecution.
Paul, do you think Labour's doing enough, Labour Party, Keir Starmer as leader, doing enough to oppose the language? This is a Labour MP. She hasn't got any other support as yet. To oppose the language and oppose what the government's doing?
I think it's picturing it exactly right, because we need to convince voters who are concerned about migration, OK? And not everyone has the liberal principles that I have on migration, and I understand that. So I think the Labour Party has achieved a balance, which is to say, of course, we do need laws that allow us to decide whether a refugee has a genuine case and should be resettled here, and we should do that genuinely, and those who don't need to be processed through the system. What we're saying, by the way, the word on the front of the bill is not what matters. What matters is whether or not, I come back to what you say, Bim, what are the legal routes here to the United Kingdom for the people I met in Morocco, sitting on a waste ground from Niger, desperate, who want to come somewhere OK, what are the legal routes
at the
for them?
moment there aren't, but the government
It's been
has
admitted
said,
that there are.
so it's been
Yeah.
reported, that they're going to set up those safe and legal routes. Do you think, Sarah, that the Labour Party is doing enough to stand up for asylum seekers and refugees who arrive here?
I don't really know, to be honest. I mean, I know the Liberal Democrat view, obviously, is precisely this around safe and legal routes. Without that, the rest of this legislation and everything else that's being talked about is slightly a nonsense. I think where I agree with Stella Creasy is that this particular piece of legislation is a waste of MPs' time. We've got plenty of legislation already. The fundamental problem is the amount of time it takes to process asylum seekers' claims. I think we've currently got 166,000 people in this country waiting, which has increased fivefold from about 4 or 5 years ago. And that's really the problem. And that's why we have so many in hotels and why we're facing these real problems of trying to
You'll sign up to this amendment, will you?
I mean, absolutely. Fundamentally, we disagree with the idea that seeking asylum should ever be an illegal act.
Is it important? The language, of course, is important. Is it toxic rhetoric from the government? We've talked about the substance too. But is it toxic to talk about people arriving here in the UK as being illegal from the moment they arrive?
I think that you're right to talk about moderate language. We do all need moderation around this debate because actually, as we've talked about here, there are very significant logistical challenges that need to be overcome, whether that's returners, about processing and about making sure the legal system gives the governments and asylum seekers the rights that they need. But actually, the question of illegality, I mean, I kind of slightly feel like this is a distraction from the actual essence of the issue because really, I mean, YouGov have done some polling, that indicates when you put the word illegal and you take away the word illegal, the public opinion doesn't actually change significantly on the issue of substance. And so I don't think that just talking about the word illegal is actually toxifying or detoxifying the debate. The thing that has caused, I think, Paul to be perhaps not in line with public opinion is a sense that this is out of control. And actually, that's a sentiment that is shared across a lot of countries in Europe. Like, there's no country that successfully managed what has been a tidal shift in the number of people that are coming over on small boats. And it is a problem across lots and lots of countries in Europe, including, for instance, in Australia as well. And there isn't really a one kind of very quick solution to that fundamental problem. Talking about the question of illegal or not illegal is a distraction.
We're going to finish on something completely different. Let's have a look at this headline in the Daily Mail. Furious prostitutes will protest in Amsterdam over city's bid to drive away British zombie tourists. This is in response to a pretty hard-hitting campaign by the City Council of Amsterdam, and they've released this video which is aimed solely at British men between the ages of 18 to 35, and there are flashing images. You can see here that they are trying to deter very firmly British men, as I say, between those ages, going to Amsterdam purely for a good night out or a good weekend away, a stag night. Do you think it's a fair characterisation of British men, Bim?
No. Not thankfully, I'm now no longer in the 18 to 35 group, so maybe I'm not the target. I've now become older. They're not interested. I mean, look, I think that Amsterdam is a fantastic place. I went there for the first time with my family, my wife and my in-laws, might I add.
OK, so you weren't in that?
Only a few months ago. But if they have certain rules that are different to much of Europe in relation to cannabis and various other things, then it's not wholly surprising if people come from other parts of Europe to Amsterdam.
Are you surprised by this campaign and this video? I mean, you're also, I think I can say, over 35.
Definitely. Although I've been to Amsterdam a few times and love the city. Actually, it's not the only city that is trying to move on from the kind of Club 1830. Even islands in Greece are trying to move on from it. There's a Greek island that's basically trying to say, enough of this. I think what we're reaching is a tipping point of toleration among tourist cities and tourist islands for a kind of hedonism that young people here do go, and young people in America, look, it's happening in America. The so-called spring break is on the way right now, and there are places like Florida and Hawaii just saying, get lost.
Well, so and we're all off very soon. Well, I'm going to have to interject because we're at the end of the programme. We're all going off for Easter, but not to Amsterdam. From all of us here, bye-bye.